The Kalita Wave is my favorite way to make a cup of coffee. Let's talk about why. First off, you have to start with good coffee. Otherwise, it doesn't matter. I get my beans from a place called Oddly Correct. I get them shipped here every other week. They have consistently been some of the best coffee that I've ever had. I highly recommend trying to find a local roaster. Here in the past, I've also really enjoyed Evocation Coffee, based out of where I live. There are a bunch of really high quality shops out there. Just do a little searching. It's nice to have one that is easily available. So let's talk a little bit about the process. This is the Kalita Wave. It is ridged on the inside, does a fantastic job of just making a really good, really consistent cup of coffee. So what I do is I start here on a scale. This particular scale is an Ascali, and while it's decent and it works great, it's not necessarily the one I recommend. There are a couple of better scales that I would probably steer people towards, especially if they're just getting into coffee. But this one does just fine. What I typically do is I'll measure out 17 grams of coffee, 17.5 if you have a scale that will do increments of 0.1 grams. This does not. That's one of the reasons I don't like it. So I measure out the 17 grams of coffee. The next thing that you really need is a decent grinder. This is the Encore from Baratza, and I'm a big fan of this particular model. It's kind of pricey. If you're just dipping your toes into the water of coffee, this may not be exactly the model you want to go with, but if you are someone that is trying to elevate their coffee game or someone that's just really chasing the perfect cup of coffee, I think this does a fantastic job of giving a consistent grind. It's very fast in the morning. It's not nearly as loud as I was expecting it to be. It's really, really good at what it does. I want to say that I paid around $100 to $130 for this. If you get a refurbished model directly from Baratza, it carries a warranty with it. It saves you a little bit of cash. It's decent. There are hand grinders also. I have one in particular that I will recommend that I used for years that does a really, really great job. And it takes a little more elbow grease, takes a little more effort in the morning, and that's why I typically don't like people to use those. There's nothing wrong with using a spice grinder style, which I'm sure you've seen the Mr. Coffee, press the button and it grinds with a blade down at the bottom. But it won't be as consistent, and you're gonna have a lot harder time nailing down the same taste every time for your coffee. So right here, we're using the Baratza. You take those 17 grams of beans, pour them in. Flip this little switch on the side, and all those beans are ground up. So we're ready with the coffee. Do not pour your ground coffee directly into the filter. It'll give you a papery taste because we haven't yet wet the filter. So what we need to do next is we grab a kettle. This is the kettle I use. Obviously, I've been using it for a while. It's a little torn up, a little worn. It has a cool little temperature gauge, if you can see that on the top. But the water temperature is incredibly important. So is the type of water you use. I use Ozarka bottled water. I'm a fan of the way that it tastes. I think it does a really, really good job. It's spring water. If you have too filtered of water, it's gonna taste kind of bitter. It's too clean of water. There's nothing in it. That has to do with the total dissolved solids, and that is a science that I am not very good at, but someone who is a little bit more versed in coffee might be able to explain some of those differences. The shorter part about water is you want something that you would be willing to drink, something that tastes good. Tap water generally is not good. Think about it this way. Water is the #1 ingredient in your coffee. It needs to taste good. So use good water. If you have super purified water, there is a company called Third Wave Water, and they will do these packets that you can dissolve in a 5-gallon jug or in a regular gallon jug. It will give you great water for your coffee. But this is typically what I use. So we're gonna pour this into our kettle. Now, here's another thing to note. If you're using this pour over style of coffee as your method, it is super helpful to have a gooseneck kettle. And this little gooseneck gives you control over the pour, which we will need here in just a moment. So we're gonna wait for this to kind of heat up. One of the keys with water temperature is you don't want it to be boiling. You want it to be shy of boiling. Around 205 degrees is just about perfect. We can take a look. I don't know if you can see this on camera. I'm gonna try and do a close-up of it somewhere else, but inside there you can see that's about the grind size that you want. So if you have a Baratza Encore, I'll tell you the setting that I have mine on is roughly 1 notch past 10. Around there is about perfect for a pour over. So our water's done. The very first thing that we want to do is wet this filter. And so I just pour a little bit of water around, and all that's doing is soaking out the paper taste in the filter. So we let that drain down just a little bit. So now that we've dumped that extra water, which is important, that water is sitting down in the bottom of your cup, you dump that out almost immediately afterwards, and we take our grind, I tap it down just to get all of it loosened up, dump it in there, and it looks great. I like to even it out by just kind of shaking it like that, and we turn our scale back on. Now for the ratio of water to coffee here, we have 17 grams of coffee. I want to do 280 grams of water. So what I'm going to do, this first part is called the bloom. And I do anywhere between a 75 gram and an 80 gram bloom. And I just want to wet all the coffee grounds. And you'll see these really nice bubbles. I'm going to try and show those bubbles with this other camera real quick. Let's see if I can make that something we see. It's releasing the carbon dioxide in the coffee. Typically that's a sign of very fresh coffee. If it's not blooming, you may have gotten some old coffee. It's another great reason to try and find a local roaster or find someone like Oddly Correct, where they'll ship to you at a scheduled day. Mine comes to me 2 days off roast. And you see I'm just working in a slow, methodical, circular pattern around the outside. This is a very forgiving method of brewing a cup of coffee. A lot of people are craving the convenience of a Keurig or a Mr. Coffee coffee maker, and there's nothing wrong with those styles of coffee, but this is so much better tasting, and it's so little effort on top of what else you were otherwise doing. For me, this is ritual in the morning. It's something that I really enjoy. I really look forward to. It allows me to kind of ease into my day in a way that pushing a button on a Keurig or dumping the coffee grounds into a Mr. Coffee just doesn't. This is a better way to prepare for the day, in my opinion. It smells great. This is a really, really good cup of coffee. One of my favorite things about this brew method is as soon as it's done, this is pretty much done draining. We still have a little bit of coffee coming out, but we take this, the whole filter and everything can go directly into the trash. And it's that easy. I just rinse this out now. And once that's rinsed out, we're done. That is dead simple, very easy. This is your cup of coffee, and it tastes great. I hope you liked this video. I think the Kalita is the best way to make a cup of coffee, but there are other ways that are very comparable that you might also want to try, especially if you're just dipping your toes into the water of figuring out what you like in a cup of coffee. I'm going to create another how-to video for the V60, which is very, very similar to this, and another video for the AeroPress. And there's several ways to brew on the AeroPress, but I found what I think is the easiest way, the most fail-proof way to have a fantastic cup of coffee. I appreciate you guys watching. Comment, subscribe, all that kind of stuff, and we'll see you in the next one.